and welcome to the GreenTruth podcast by TiiQu, your go-to destination for insightful conversations on sustainability. We're committed to delving into diverse perspectives on environmental issues, guided by the belief that embracing truth empowers us to create a better world for generations to come. I'm Chantal Kershepard, your host, and today I'm joined by Hugh Montgomery. He's a professor of intensive care medicine at UCL and chair of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. Thank you so much for being with us today, Hugh.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I think a great place to start is how you define sustainability yourself, because there are so many different definitions, and to understand your perspective on it gives us a great framework for going forward.
Yeah, so very simply, if something's not sustainable, it stops. And that's used, of course, in environmental terms, perhaps in terms of resources, where if we have limited resources, you can't use them inexhaustibly. So using limited resources is never going to be sustainable. The problem we now face is that we're threatening the sustainability, i.e. the ability for it to continue, of life on Earth and human life as we know it, due to what we're doing to our environment. And we need to think of it in those terms, because sustainability otherwise is a meaningless phrase. It's just something that's used as trying to be good. And I get quite cross when I hear people saying, oh, we're more sustainable, because more sustainable is unsustainable.
I completely agree. So your background isn't quite sitting in sustainability. Through your training and your career, your expertise sits in medtech and pharmaceuticals. So what led you to pick up sustainability and becoming what I would say is an activist alongside what you've trained in?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm much more. I trained I did physiology and then medicine, and I'm trained in medicine and medical research, really. So that's what I've done. But in the late 1990s, the work we were doing in genetics and so forth was being published in journals like Nature, which is where the other papers I was reading were published. And I always describe Nature as a bit like a highbrow Cosmo. It's a sort of, you look at one article and next to it is something else about string theory or black holes or ancient hominids, and your eye is caught by the next door article. And I was seeing what looked to me like very alarming papers about climate change published then. But it was a time when the press was going on saying, oh, there's no such thing as climate change, or it's going to get colder. So I spent a year or two reading the climate science and physics and trying to understand the process and what it meant. And when you do that, of course, you reach the conclusion, which is unavoidable, which is that it's real, it's terrifying, it's immediate, and it's a threat to our existence, not of future generations. It's a threat to your life, and you're clearly a great deal younger than I am, and to my life, and I'm 62. So having cottoned on with that, I started work to try to address it, and have clearly failed, because emissions are still going up. We're now chucking out over 40 billion metric tons of CO2 a year into our atmosphere.
I certainly wouldn't say you failed. I would say it's a work in progress, but you might disagree with me. You've certainly set up a not-for-profit committed to this cause, specifically called Real Zero, haven't you?
Yes, I've done a lot of things. I've done children's education programs and books, lectures, worked in the COP negotiations, politically advised various government departments here and abroad. Have done an awful lot of such things, but none of them have actually achieved anything. We sometimes confuse process with product in life, and we think that the more meetings we have and the more publications we put out, that we're doing something, and we're not. The only metric that matters is, have we got to zero emissions? And we haven't, and they're still going up. We tried to avert that by getting health into the climate negotiations, the COP processes, probably 15 years ago now, by reframing it as something that wasn't just about polar bears, and that hasn't worked either. We've run the Lancet Countdown, which is documenting health impacts of climate change, and really we're just documenting our own extinction. Every year we just say it's bad, it's getting worse, and no one's doing anything.
And is that the main work of Real Zero?
Well, Real Zero is focused on trying to find one other way in, because given that nothing else has worked, we've got to take a different tack. Talking to politicians isn't going to work. Politicians around the world won't lead. we need to create the permissive environment for them to work. And we've got this horrible tessellation at the moment where politicians won't act in a country because they're short term and they don't think they're going to get voted in, and they'll rank things like the economy ahead. But as of course we now know from a Nature paper 2 weeks ago, we're now committed to $35 trillion a year coming off the world economy within the next couple of decades. We've got a 1 in 300 chance of a single weather event in one country taking 17.5 trillion off the world economy in a week. There won't be an economy for a country if we continue as we are. But nonetheless, they won't act for that reason because they don't think people will vote for it, and companies don't want it. Companies won't act because they say the people won't demand it from them because their prices might be higher, and government won't legislate for it. And people won't do it because they say governments aren't making them do it and the businesses won't let them. And that tessellates around the world in that a company here will say, well, we're not going to act here because our rival won't and they'll be cheaper or they'll offshore. And a government here says, well, we're not going to act because a government in India or China isn't acting. And people here go, well, what's the point in me acting because someone in a foreign country won't? So we need to unlock that. And the answer is entirely about moving money. And every individual should do that across everything that they do. But the health sector is a way in. We're globally around 11.7% of the world's global domestic product. If you add in consumer healthcare products like Durex and Dettol and toothpaste, it's a lot more than that. And if you add in social care and let alone the industry to supply it, it's more again. And if we can move that health ecosystem's finance very quickly, then we're in with a small chance that we might be able to leverage the scale of speed of change that we need. So that's really what we're focused on trying to do. I'm not optimistic that we'll succeed. I think it is much the likeliest thing that it'll kill me, and I'm 62, and it'll kill my son who's 18. I can't think that it's likely that civilization will exist as we know it. By the time he gets to 30, it's likely to be over for him by then. That's the reason we've got to act, though. I need to be able to at least look him in the eye and say I tried.
So you've mentioned that there's real urgency in doing this. What do you think the biggest collective action we could all kind of do? What is the one key solution to this climate change problem, or do you think it's a multitude of solutions?
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, there are a small selection. It's not a lot of things, but the big thing is moving the money, because that's got huge leverage power. Businesses and banks will respond. Politicians will respond too. So if you wanted the shortlist for individuals, the first is move your bank account. Move your bank account from a bank that funds fossil fuels, which all of the high street banks do, the big ones, and move it to ones that don't. In Britain, that would be the Cooperative Bank, Monzo, Triodos, Nationwide Building Society, for instance. It's dead easy to do. You can do it online. There isn't any worry that it won't move your direct debits and that stuff. It just happens for you. It's been well legislated for, and they say it takes 20 minutes. In honesty, it probably takes 40 to fill the forms in. But that's, get a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and do it. That's number one. Secondly, move to 100% renewable power supplier. There are many there. A lot of them aren't honest. The ones that are, there are quite a few. Good Energy, for instance, Octopus Energy in Great Britain. But that really doesn't take very long. That's 20 minutes. And the customer service from these companies is really good, actually. So again, easy to do. Thirdly, change food. Methane is 83 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as is carbon dioxide in its first 20 years. And the bit we can leverage outside moving from fossil fuels, because of course, natural gas, as it's called, to make it sound nice, is methane. It's the same stuff. But the food industry is responsible for a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So moving away from ruminant meat, cattle and lamb, and moving away from dairy as much as you can stops belching cows. And it also stops us chopping down rainforests to feed the cows or graze them. If we're eating local, seasonal and plant-based, we're getting rid of the transport emissions. We're getting the refrigeration emissions. And actually, just as an example for that, my drug of choice is caffeine. And if you look at coffee, it's grown, someone uses a machine, get the beans, takes the stones out, dries them, roasts them, ships them, grinds them, extracts the solutes, turns it into instant coffee, melts sand to make glass, puts a lid on it, ships it around the world, puts it on the supermarket shelf. I get it. The water is pumped, chlorinated. I plug my kettle in and boil it, and I make myself a cup of coffee. The splash of milk I would add to that, which I don't, but if I were to, the CO2 emissions from that splash of milk alone would vastly exceed that of all of the rest. It's because cows belch methane, and it's because you flash pasteurized milk, so heat it rapidly to 73 degrees and then rapidly cool it, all taking energy. And then it's refrigerated for its entire supply chain. So I'm not being puritanical, but it isn't difficult to move to a largely local, seasonal and plant-based diet. It's cheaper. It's also very, very much healthier. You'll live a lot longer if you move to that sort of diet. So that's easily done. Transport's important. Walk and cycle if you can. I know that some people can't, but if you can, do. Have your meetings online rather than traveling. If you have to travel, take a train or use mass public transport. If you have to share car, use a car share, and try not to fly. I do appreciate that some people do have to on occasion, but just try not to. So transport is important. Those are the major things. There are some simple things to do with lower carbon living at home. In the winter, if you turn your radiator temperature down by 1 degree Celsius, it saves you 7 to 11% on your emissions and your bills, which is a shed load. So buy a couple of nice jumpers and put them on and turn your heating down 4 degrees. You could nearly halve your bills in the winter. And the other bit is remember that you have influence with other people. So advertisers will tell us that you have 7 people who either respect you or love you so much they will pretty much do whatever you tell them. It might be your parents or your siblings or your kids or your best mate for university. But there are 7 people, if you said, I really want you to do these things, would go, okay, well, it's Chantal, I'll do it because it's her, even if I don't really buy into it. And you have a vote. And half the world's population is voting this year, pretty much, in democracies. Now is the time to contact your prospective candidate, in Britain for sure, and say, I will be voting based on the most aggressive climate change action. Where do you stand? They'll reply, it'll probably be wishy-washy and say, oh, we do very well, yada, 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 we've got very green. But it sends the message to the parties that this is a big issue on which to campaign. So now is the time to do it, not just when you vote, because they won't be able to tell why you voted. So those are the immediate actions. Then, of course, there's the things in workplace. So I work in the health service. I can try to make sure that public health is addressed so we don't get people sick in the first place with the health cost. I can try and streamline the pathways of care for them to not do unnecessary tests. I can try and move my workplace to plant-based food, as has happened in New York hospitals, actually. New York hospitals are now plant-based.
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah. It's great, isn't it? If New York can do it, we certainly can. And we can start trying to get my NHS Trust to move its power supply and go around and switch all the lights off and do all those boring things too. But we do have agency. The big thing is you've got to do it. It's not good enough to hear this podcast and go, oh, well, maybe someone else will, or I feel a bit disempowered. Just do those things tonight. Most of those are things you can do or commit to doing this evening. And you must. And get your friends around. As I say, that if you're finding it a struggle, buy a bottle of wine or 2, invite 7 or 8 friends around and say, right, we're all going to move our bank accounts and power supplier. I'll provide the wine, bring your laptop, and take an hour, and then the jobs are good.
That's a proper nerdy evening.
Yeah, it'd be a bit of fun. And remember, COVID had an R of 3.4. So, every time one person was infected, they'd infect 3.4 more people. And look what that did to the world. If you've got an R of 7, you on your own with a few mates, you could fix the world in a week.
I really like that. You've gone from painting quite a grim picture, which is completely fair enough, to being really optimistic and saying how you can really influence change just on an individual level, which I really love, and in a really practical way. It's not just talking about it, actually helping people through it.
But can and must. And remember that leverage. It's not about just the emissions by the flight you didn't take or the beef you didn't buy. It's the impact that when even a modest number of you do that, it has on the businesses. The businesses start to move. The people who fund those businesses start hedging against them, going, well, hang on, this beef consumption doesn't look like a good bet to us. This coal mining looks a bit dangerous to us. And once they start moving, the hedge funds move, the pension funds move. I should, of course, have mentioned that if you do have investments, make sure they're not in companies that are involved in fossil fuel extraction and move them to companies that are the goodies. I'm on a few charity boards, and all of those charity boards have now moved. So where you've got such influence, it's worth exercising it. And you know what? It's a good bet. People might tell you right now, well, you can get more if you're in oil and coal and gas, whatever else. Well, just at the moment you can. But either everyone's dead and there's no economy, in which case it's
Doesn't matter.
pointless, or you're backing a horse
Yeah.
that's going to win. So that's what I would do.
This is the problem I have. So many people are like, oh, why should we do this? Why should we do that? I'm like, even if anybody doesn't believe in climate change, or which I find ridiculous at this point in time, but even if you don't believe it, we're building a healthier, better, more sustainable world anyway. So what's the problem with doing it?
Oh yeah, there you are. You made that mistake of saying more sustainable
Oh
again.
yeah, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, it's like net zero, by the way, which we should mention, because that's another thing that makes me very angry, because there is no such thing as net. Net zero means we'll somehow draw down the CO2 we continue to emit. But there is no technology that will do that. There's one out there, it's called a rainforest. It's really good, but we're smashing it. Otherwise, it's magic pixie dust, it's unicorns, it's magical thinking. And it's also a con, because it allows businesses and governments say, we're going to have a net zero target, which isn't a commitment, and we're going to have a net zero target for 2045. You'll be dead from climate change before 2045. You don't know what the trajectory is, and you've got no means of delivering it. So there's only one answer, which is real zero. By how much can you reduce your own and everyone else's emissions right now? That's the key thing.
It sounds like there's a lot that we can all do on an individual level and on a corporate level, but it all requires behavior change. What do you think the challenge is to get people to change that behavior? Obviously, I'm on board, you're on board, but we might live in a little bubble. How do we get the average person that wakes up and believes the world should always be as it is, and why should they bother?
You probably can't change them. And if they don't change, they're going to be dead. So I suppose that there's been a long history, I think, of getting it wholly wrong. There's this story that if you tell people scary things, they run away with their fingers in their ears and won't do anything. I work in medicine. If you're dying of something, I say to you, here are the things you need to do, and these are the hard yards we're going to have to do if you want to survive. But I tell you, therefore, that you're about to die if you don't, but I also tell you what it is you need to do. So I do believe in telling people the truth. This is how scary it is, but here are the things that you can and must do to get out of it. What we've been told in the past is, oh, don't say scary things. The problem if you say, look, this might sound a bit scary, but it's not really, and hey, the world could be so much nicer if you did X or Y. If you're poor, you go, I just need to put food on the table. I don't have these choices and I don't fly anyway. And if you're middle class or rich, the answer is what? The world will be better than my skiing holiday every year and the kids' private education. I mean, that message doesn't land. So the one that does land is that you're the only one who hasn't moved. And the data are pretty clear on that. We're all social animals. We all like to think we have individual agency and that we all have our own opinions. But the truth is, we're all influenced by those around us, whether it's the clothes we wear or the films we watch or how much we drink and whether we take up smoking or how we vote or anything else. We're social beasts. If everyone else is moving and you're not, we're all sort of programmed to join the gang. And that's why us all acting has such an impact, because those in our penumbra, the cloud around us, look and they want to be part of the gang. They like Chantal. They think Chantal's cool. They want to hang out with Chantal, therefore they want to do what Chantal does. And we've just got to spread that plurality of action. But that's the key bit. Take the action, tell people you're doing it, and make it in your social group that you're saying, what, you're the one who hasn't? Are you serious?
FOMO.
And then don't beat them up too much. Just say, come on, make it easy. I'll get the wine round. Come round tonight. We'll just do it. Right? Bring your bill. We'll do it on the computer. You'll feel good about yourself. And that, by the way, is worth mentioning. People often talk about focusing on the big ticket items, which you should, because when people say, oh, I recycle my Coke cans, well, great.
Yeah, it's a minor part of lots of other things we need to do.
But it's the entry-level drug. And if people act, they retrofit beliefs. We know this to be true from cognitive behavioral psychology. So you do something, and you will often retrofit a belief to why you did it. So if you can get your friends around and get them to move their bank accounts and their power supplier and to get a veg box and do all those other things, they will often convince themselves that actually, do you know what? Well, I was always green, really. It's taken me a while to get there, but I really get this climate change. It will up their willingness to take more action. So helping people along that way. But everyone listening to this podcast, if they haven't taken those actions, must tonight. But the other thing they've just got to commit to is draw up your target list. Who are you going to hit? Who are those 7 people or more that you can make sure have done all of those things? And then set a timeline for doing it.
I love
this.
this.
When you send them out, say, your job now is to go forth and do the same.
Like a really positive for the planet pyramid scheme, which can only get better, not worse.
Yeah, not a Ponzi scheme, but a proper pyramid.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm actually going to do this. I've already thought about a million ways I can do it. And actually, it's there's another podcast who do Pint for the Planet to get people into pubs talking about the planet and what they're doing in their local community. And it's on a similar vein to that, but I like it. I love it.
That'd be great. So it's a good idea, isn't it? Why not do it in a pub? Get the pub to, everyone brings a laptop in, use the pub Wi-Fi, gets a few beers in, brings a bill with them and all does it. Because actually, that's a really whacking. If you had 50 or 60 people in a pub that do that, and then each of those gets 7, that's a 400 or 500 people within a week that you'd have reached.
Like positive planet parties. That's what I'm going to call it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Okay, you can trademark that one.
Brilliant.
The planet party. Yeah.
So these are all the positive things we can do. I think the other thing that is challenging, so behaviour change is challenging, but you've given some very good examples of how we can do that. The other thing that's really challenging is a lot of misinformation and finding the correct sources and kind of backing up everything that you're saying to people at these parties that we're going to have about positive planet. How do you propose addressing misinformation? Is there anywhere we can go to get correct sources?
It's a really good question because it's very, very difficult. I mean, I'm at an age where I don't consume social media as the way that your generation and the younger people do. We know that, in some communities, it's more than 8 out of 10 people get all of their information from TikTok. And remember that these algorithms are not designed to tell you the truth. No. They're designed to get you to use the algorithm more. So they're designed to feed you more and more of the stuff that makes you use the product. And that's why you can end up in a massive echo chamber with data that positively enforce your view. Now, I try and get around that by using a VPN and by blinding my everything I do and switching off anything that tracks me, not because I've got anything to hide, but because I want to get all the information from all the sources coming my way, not something that just confirms my beliefs, because otherwise all I'll ever see is stuff that says climate change is really dangerous and bad and so forth. I think one just has to remember that there are reputable sources. So NASA, if you're wanting atmospheric data, the UK Met Office, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in America. For us in health, it's the Lancet Countdown, the World Health Organization, Exeter, Tim Lenton's group, the Institute of Actuaries and Insurers, Lloyd's of London. These are serious, credible brands that you can trust. If you hear of the so-and-so institute, you don't really know what is the so-and-so institute? It could be any bunch of quacks. And you need to check. So it's worth just doing the due diligence on your source of information. But it is difficult. I've been in this game for 20 something years, and therefore, for me, it's dead easy. But I appreciate for many people it's not. And remember, of course, that if you do a Google search, the results that come up on your search will be different from mine
Yeah.
because it's learned what I look for. And you may end up getting a load of stuff that's disinformation. Remember, of course, there's an awful lot of it in there. There are vested interests here who we know in the fossil fuel industry have heavily funded disinformation campaigns in
Because they want to
exactly
keep
the
their
same
business
reason.
going.
Of course. And it's selfish because what they want to do at the top is cash in 3 years' time, get the share options, make the money, and exit. And they're either ignorant or they're dangerous. They're not stupid, these people.
No.
They're often ignorant. I think they just see the world very often in a different political lens. And that is that anyone who talks about planet or environment must be some sort of left-wing person who's trying to bring down civilization. And it's not true.
What do you think the big problem is in companies like fossil fuel companies? Why do you think there isn't change? Because to me, it's quite obvious. Everybody can see a better future doing stuff with renewables, which makes entire sense. Then you've got a constant source of energy rather than mining stuff that's going to run out. But why aren't they making the change?
It's infrastructure, a massive amount of infrastructure, from oil rigs to pipelines to refineries to distribution networks and petrol stations and power stations. There is a huge industry, and I totally understand that you strand all of those assets. You're binning trillions of dollars. You're leaving 20 plus $1 trillion worth of fossil fuels in the ground. And if you're in business and you've been raised that way, that's anathema, isn't it? It's just we do what? We've invested all this stuff and we just walk away from it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now you're making me slightly sympathetic towards them. But yes, you are right. They've worked so hard.
Also, being fair, there is legislation that says you have to maximise the value to your shareholder, and when that is in some ways in which most companies set up, that's fiscal. And the way you'll get the quickest return right now, no question, in many domains, is oil and coal and gas. So it takes some moral leadership as well as a true understanding. And my experience of many CEOs is that they just don't get it. They understand there's this thing called sustainability. They've heard of something called net, and they put someone on the ESR or their CSR, corporate social responsibility agenda, who turns up to board and says, yes, we're doing what everyone else is doing. And they go, oh, jolly good. They don't understand that we have to have absolutely radical change. And actually, they could lead this. If in my industry, let's say in healthcare, let's just imagine a world where the big, 7 or 8 pharmaceutical companies got together and said, okay, we're going to not compete on this. We're going to change our contracts. We're just going to say that from 2025, unless you committed to be at pretty much zero carbon emissions by 2030, we're not buying any products from you. What do you think all of their suppliers, the people who they're going to walk away?
They're going to change.
They're going to change.
Because they want to make money, because it's all about money.
And that's now where the market is. And that will then cascade down, because if I'm making needles, I get to my steel from somewhere, and I'll be saying to the steel manufacturer, look, I can't buy from you unless you go this way. These things could make huge differences.
Yeah, it's collaboration on a massive scale, isn't it?
Yeah. And if supermarkets really got together and said, we're not going to compete on price, or we are going to compete on price rather, we're going to still do that, and value and all those other propositions, but on greenhouse gases, we're not. And we will work with farmers together to deliver this. We will change our refrigeration. We will change our transport. We will change our banking and our investments. We will change all of these things together in our contracts. The world would change almost immediately. It just takes people having moral courage and to show leadership. And we've forgotten in the world what leadership and moral courage are. And I'm always minded of the Second War. We had women of 5'3" whose only skill set was that they taught French in primary schools. volunteering, be parachuted into occupied France when the average time before you got caught, tortured, and killed was 11 days. But they volunteered to do it because it was the right thing to do. And now we live in a world where people defray their responsibilities, and say that someone else needs to do it or that they have no agency. But we live in an age of consequence now.
Yeah, I think it's changed massively. I think the whole World War II effort felt like we all lived in a society. Well, I wasn't there, but it sounded like everybody was in a society that worked together for change. Whereas I feel like the culture we live in at the moment is really individualistic, and we've forgotten that actually we're a society that needs to work together, and things need to change, but they can't change with just one person doing something.
And we do have responsibility for other people, but equally in this situation, even if we're selfish, this is the thing to do. If you want to live, the way to do it, prisoner's dilemma, the way to do it is to collaborate, lead, take action, even if you're only doing it for your own selfish reasons.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's really inspiring. I know you've said it's really urgent. You've spoken about not being around for a long time, but you've really inspired me that we could actually make change. So thank you so much. I think the one last thing I'd like to ask is, what would you implore? And I think I know your answer already. What would you implore our listeners to do? The one thing they can do today, if they can.
Commit in your heart to acting and then acting on those things we've said. It's easy to hear things. It's easy to think it would be a good idea. It's easy to say, I will do that at some point. But there's a difference. When I looked in after a high-risk cardiovascular clinic, you always knew if you'd say, look, you're got a very high risk of dying of a stroke or a heart attack, you're diabetic, hypertensive, hypercholesterolemic, overweight, and you're smoking for today, you've just got to stop smoking if you want to live and not have a stroke or a big heart attack. If someone said, I'm going to stop, I will stop, then probably they would. If they said, oh, I'll try, doctor, you knew they weren't at all. So the one thing everyone's got to do is just, when they finish this, switch the podcast off, reflect for 30 seconds, and go, in my heart, am I committed to doing this? Make the commitment, then diary the time. Tonight, do it right now, do it this evening. Do that thing we talked about, get 10 mates around with a bottle of wine and we'll do it together, but commit to making those decisions and movements, and then commit to making your list of the other 7 people that you're going to move as well.
I love that. Put it on your to-do list. That's what we should all do.
Yes, and then do it.
Well, thank you so much, Hugh. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. And yes, let's hope there's a future when we can have a conversation again.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning into today's episode of the GreenTruth podcast. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and inspiring. Remember, it's through understanding, truth, and action that we pave the way for a more sustainable future, or a sustainable future, in Hugh's words. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking conversations, and don't forget to leave us a review. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth.